Hello, hello. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Very good. I know we typically don't get to sit down and talk about what it is that goes into meeting planning. So I'm super excited to have this conversation with you. But no one knows who you are or what you do or why you're incredible. So tell me a little bit about who is Lee Avery?
Well, thank you. I'm excited to be asked. It's very nice. I've been working in the hospitality and meeting industry for almost 25 years. My family will tell you even longer. I've been planning events since I was 7 years old when I stage managed our family reunions talent show at 7. With that said, I'm a huge foodie. I love food. I love to talk about food. I love to eat food. I love to plan food. And I started out working in hotels and festivals and events, social catering, a lot of weddings, bar and bat mitzvahs, celebrations of life, all sorts of great things. I was fortunate enough to be recruited to work for the caterer at the Washington, D.C. Convention Center when they opened the new center. And so my focus was very much on how to do events for large numbers of people. So, you could have a board meeting for 15 people, you could have a conference that had 25,000 people at it, and everything in between. So, my focus has been food and beverage specific for many years. I worked in both DC and Denver. I've done things at stadiums and arenas, but I also worked at a culinary school. So my life has kind of revolved around food and beverage.
Sure.
The culinary school also had a sommelier program, so I know about wine. I just had some extraordinary experiences. I've gotten to work on presidential inaugural balls. I've gotten to work a Super Bowl. I've gotten to do some really special events that I just feel very privileged to get to work on.
Yeah. What a cool events in general
This
expose
is all
us
the part that
to.
everyone thinks is so fun and sexy,
Sure.
like I'm having three martini lunches, but that's not actually the case. It's a lot of work, and a lot of meeting planners are nervous about food and beverage and can get very
Absolutely.
scared because it's hard to know. But I have years of working as on the vendor partner side, years. And I know all sorts of types of events. I've worked for associations, nonprofits, because at a public facility or a government-owned facility, you have to work on everything. So you
Yeah.
have sporting competitions for cheerleading and basketball and volleyball that come through, and they are very budget conscious and they want the retail concessions available. So I got to know what people like to eat and what they're willing to spend their money on. And then I've got associations or nonprofits that are probably a bit more budget conscious. And then I've got some corporate events that are like the sky's the limit. We just want to make sure that we're presenting ourselves to our customers and our guests in the best way possible. So you have really large budgets. So I did that for years, and I think it makes me an excellent planner now that I'm in a freelance position. I contract to several experiential marketing agencies to help them plan with their corporate, a little bit of association and nonprofit events, but for the most part, it's corporate events that I work on now, but I get to plan on some really unique, special, different events as well as your standard corporate conferences.
Yeah.
So user group conferences, sales kickoffs, different annual events that happen regularly for some Silicon Valley based firms.
Yeah. So what a wealth of knowledge you are bringing to this conversation. So honored to talk about this hard topic that many people get hung up on, right? There's a saying in event planning that if you sneeze, your catering budget goes up by $2,000, right? Like if you ask for a different creamer, your catering budget goes up by $50,000, right? So I think you hit the nail on the head that for a lot of planners, this topic of food and beverage is one that people don't really want to touch with a 100-foot pole because there is a lot of nuance and experience that comes to the table when you are managing a food and beverage budget. So I thought it was a perfect conversation to have with you to dig a layer deeper into what success means when managing a food and beverage budget.
Sure.
So to start that off, let's set the tone of we are talking generally about a multi-day conference event, even though food and beverage is a piece of every event budget, even if it's a special event for a one night gala or a no holds bar sales kickoff or blowout celebration, right? But the majority of what we want to focus on is these multi-day conferences, and that can range from 500 attendees to 15,000 attendees. In these scenarios, we're typically managing a multi-day event with
Right.
a lot of services that go into it. Tell me where you start that journey from a budget perspective.
Well, two things. One, if I know the event, if I've worked on it before, I have a pretty good feeling of what their budget's going to be. If I don't, obviously I start with, what is your budget for food and beverage? And I look at that and I very quickly in my mind do a calculation of, okay, it's going to be roughly this much per person. And what I do is I typically take that the main attendee budget is going to be somewhere between 50 and 70% of the food and beverage budget. And that alarms people. They're like,
Yep.
what do you mean it's not 95%? Because there's so much more that goes into it. We touch every part of the planning process. So not only do we need to know what people like to eat, when they're going to eat, how, where they're going to eat. All of these are incredibly important to consider, but we also have to take care of staff and crew. And that accounts for a good amount of money
Mm-hmm.
because they typically come in a couple of days beforehand. And there's a balance here that you have to learn that the costs of working with your technical company, your production companies, they are required to provide either a meal period and it has to be an hour long. And
Yep.
this is union or not union, you still have to feed people during the day. But if they let them go away, a lot of times they get worried that they won't get everyone back. So the decision is made, even at the high cost of catering at a lot of convention centers, hotel, resorts, is that it makes more sense to feed them. The time is less that they're stepping away and they are less likely to leave and not return. In addition, you have all the things that you don't necessarily think about. You have to feed a lot more people than is just expected. You have to know what you're going to do for your security staff. If you're going to feed them or provide beverages, they're working long days. You a lot of times have temp staff, some people call them ambassadors, and they're representing the company. They're answering questions. You want them to be happy, so you a lot of times choose to feed them. But you also need to you need to partner with your facility and you need to feed the EMTs and you need to feed the photographers and things like that. Then you also have executive offices a lot of times, and you have speaker ready rooms, and you have all these other things that start to add in. So when I get a budget, if I've worked with the group before or can look at their agenda and it's similar to what I do with other agendas, I just start working backwards. I start doing things in buckets. So like I say, I may start high 70% with attendees and I look at all the functions I need to do and I just start doing very simple math. As you know, we've worked together for several years. I like my Excel spreadsheets. I'm learning new systems. I'm learning to use different tools that you are helping teach me about. But I like to just kind of say, okay, I have, to use a round number, I have $1 million. I'm going to spend 700,000 of that on attendees, but I have to feed them. There's usually pre-event days.
Yep.
So there's staff and crew coming in, there's pre-event days, then there are the main days, and then there's, closing out the program, which usually happens fairly quickly. So I start to put things in buckets and I start to look at menus and knowing I will do a lot of discovery with a client if it's my first time on the program. I have a series of due diligence steps that I walk through. What are the historical patterns of the group? What are the demographics of the group? What is the agenda? When are we feeding people? What's the expectation? Some clients don't do a lot at breakfast because they feel like most people, if they want breakfast, they're going to find the Starbucks or they're going to find the hotel coffee shop. And so maybe we'll just have some pastries to go. Other groups, we need to do a full hearty breakfast. And so I try to understand and do all of this. And I'm starting to whittle away at each item. I start with lunches, receptions, and then I work into breakfast as required. And then I work into breaks.
Yep.
And with time, I've gotten to have a pretty good feeling of what people consume. I also like to say I know that there's what everyone asks me to provide versus what everyone actually wants to eat.
Yep.
There is a feeling that when you go to a conference, even if it's for work, special events are different, but when you go to a conference, it's like your diet goes out the window because you can't make the food that you wanted to eat at home, or maybe your family's making you eat at home. So this is when sweet and salty and not good for you outweigh good for you, healthy fruit.
Yep, yep. Backing up a little bit. So if 70 to 75% of your total food and beverage budget is being allocated to your attendee and you're able to back down from there, then we're left with 25 to 30% of the budget for staff and crew, executive offices, any sort of ancillaries. Do you have a similar rule of thumb of saying these that staff and crew is going to eat up another 10%, executives are going to eat up another 10%? Like, are there other ratios that you're applying to those other buckets?
Well, I actually start by I always overestimate because I would rather be prepared for an overage than have to make up a big delta, if that makes sense. Another way of saying it is that I will estimate that everyone will drink 4 cups of coffee and have 2 sodas, when in likelihood they may do 2.5 cups of coffee and a soda and a half. And you're like, how do you do a half? Well, it's just averages over the
Yep.
attendees. But I estimate high because inevitably, every program, even if I've done it for 10 years, there are new things that are going to come each year that I don't know about. There
Yep.
are always people who get added on. For example, love working with the different agencies I have, but I can be told there's a staff and crew list of 50. There's actually a staff and crew list of 85 that I
Yep.
need to feed. People are constantly working on their numbers. What's interesting in food and beverages is that there's a lot of scrutiny to our numbers, but people don't necessarily question the electrical charges, or if the production company says that they need 50 people, they get 50 people. But if we say we need one more person to help support it, it's a question. So I'm building in buffers. So
Yep.
those percentages are a bit high. I don't necessarily have a certain percentage for staff and crew. I just take an estimate and I have an idea of what staff and crew is going to be each day, and I just use it as a flat rate. A lot of this also, Gregory, can happen I like to be a part of negotiations early on with facilities when I ask my clients and the agencies I work with, please let me be a part of your concessions
Yep.
conversations when you're contracting your facilities. And that's because one of the concessions I like to ask for is, can we do the staff and crew meal that we're having for the attendees at a discounted price, in line with what our staff and crew menus might be? So if they offer a lunch for $50, but they offer it to staff and crew for 30, I'd like to use the same menu across the board. It's less problematic and less production for the culinary staff, but I get it at the rate that it would be if they had to provide a whole different menu.
Yep.
And so if I
And
can
I think,
ask for those
not to cut
things.
you off, but there's a hot tip in there, right? Of
Yes.
like the same food being served to all can also often merit a price reduction, right?
Yes,
So
and you should always ask for it. It is absolutely the biggest thing I like to do is partner with my counterpart at the facility or the caterer. And I
mhm,
ask these questions if they haven't been negotiated up front. It is easier for a group to order one menu per meal than to have 4 different ones. It's less production on their side. So if you ask if it hasn't been pre-negotiated, you can usually get a discount. Now, I'm not always successful in getting it all the way down to the staff and crew menus, but those are very limiting. The part of the reason why I ask is not only for budget purposes, but also we're finding that our staff and crew have as many dietary restrictions as our attendees,
yep.
and we need to account for them. So standard staff and crew menus might have fried chicken and macaroni and cheese and a basic salad, but I don't have a protein for vegetarians, and vegans can't order either one. So what do I do for vegans or
Yeah.
people who have celiac or are lactose intolerant? So it's looking at the whole picture, but I spend almost as much time as managing the requirements and the requests on staff and crew that I do for the attendees.
So coming back to those buckets,
Mhm.
the takeaways of that are, you hinted on something else that I would love to explore, which is kind of the consumption factor of food and beverage budgeting. So we have our 70% of our bucket allocated to attendees, and then we are hedging our bets kind of with the other 30% of under over on things like sodas, things
Sure.
like candy bars or granola bars, things like a cap on the amount of coffee we allocate to a room
Yes.
before we have to approve above and beyond, right?
Right.
What are those other things that are helping you out in managing to a budget come to mind that everyone should be doing, but may not know that they should be doing it?
I ask for everything possible to be on consumption. I've tried to negotiate tea bags for some clients. So instead of just paying for, typically your cost on ordering from a caterer is you're paying an X amount for a gallon of regular, a gallon of decaf, and then they say hot water for tea.
Mhm.
But that's to me a lot of times a waste. I would rather try to see if I can negotiate a per tea bag consumed because hot water doesn't cost them anything, but yes, once you've made coffee, you can't reuse it, but
Yep.
you could certainly pour the water back down and get fresh hot water. So that's an option. I also look at all of the prepackaged items that are snacks for staff and crew offices to be on consumption. I will look for fruit. In one area of the country that we do a lot of conferences in, their health department is very strict, and people tell us that fruit can only be out for a day, that we need a fresh new set the next day. And I'm like, that's absolutely incorrect. So I will ask them to hold it over. But back to the packaged items, because of the nature of the hours that staff and crew work and they're moving around, we will do packaged snacks in offices. We make it available for the executives and in on certain breaks. I try to get all of that on a consumption basis because I don't know what people are going to be in the mood for. I may know the brands that they're going in with, but sometimes people like Lay's plain potato chips and other times people want, I don't know, Utz, and they might like the different variety. One place serves salt and pepper potato chips and puts that into their mix, and nobody likes that type. So I'm going to have less consumption of that item, but that might mean that they consume more candy bars.
But
So
with the consumption piece of it, for your
I'm
budgeting
getting,
purposes,
I
right?
estimate high. I
Yep.
estimate. So what I put on all of my orders for offices, and this includes the executive offices, because I don't know who's going to be in attendance in the meetings in those rooms, is I put a cap on the day of every item. I say this is the maximum you can go up to each day, and that's what's in my budget.
Mhm.
For the most part, under very rare circumstances, do I ever get asked to go above or do I exceed that amount? It's usually that I might estimate that we're going to spend 2,000 in an office for a day and we spend 1,300. So this is where I find little pockets of money, which I'm going to end up putting towards something else, or I'm going to come in a little under budget. We monitor this on a daily basis. We get our banquet checks, we put them into our system that we're using, and we can see at a glance of where we are versus where we budgeted to be and what we still have to come.
On
But I
that
also do
same,
the same thing with
but
coffee
yep,
and on the breaks. So larger attendee breaks, I do not like to do prepackaged items
yep,
because they just end up getting put into their briefcases or backpack to be consumed in their hotel rooms later or later in the day. So I typically do things that are not packaged individually for long term. I mean, you could still have a little cup with hummus and vegetables, but there's no top on it. So yes, it may be considered packaged or portioned, but they're not going to go put that in their backpack. With what happens on those breaks is we do put in an amount of coffee, and there's percentages with coffee. We typically look at there's about 70% of regular coffee consumed, about 20% for hot water and tea, and about 10% for decaf. So we put in for the break, it's this much. And that what ends up happening is they make that much, but I will build in with that consumption in the offices, I know that I can still add another 5 or 10 more. I work with a contingency and I always have some money put aside for when we need to go over.
yep.
So
That's a conversation that has come up in a few different conversations I had throughout the year of dependent on the end client you are interfacing with, your stakeholders, there is either an understanding of a contingency or there is you need to not show this contingency budget in your food and beverage budget, right?
yeah,
So like is that a stakeholder preference, and no matter what, from the food and beverage perspective, we should always be building in a bit of wiggle room,
100% build it in yourself. Nobody wants you to come to them with a change order that you need to add 3 gallons of coffee somewhere.
Yep.
You have to hold a percentage. And in this case, depending on the size of your budget, it's either 1%, or, it could be half a percent, a percent. I try to get 2 to 2.5% that I just put aside. But this is also where I go higher on estimates for the offices because I know that that's a little bit of a built-in contingency. Now, this money is not going anywhere except for to the client. I'm not getting handed a pile of cash and
Right.
not sharing it with them, but I'm protecting the clients. I always put a contingency in that I don't necessarily share with them
Yep.
because I know that there's going to be on-site requests. There are going to be some overages. Maybe it's bad weather and people didn't get to stop at the coffee shop, so we have some more coffee at the morning breakfast or in the
Maybe
afternoon.
it's 35 champagne toasts that need to happen in your final closeout
Exactly.
date.
So I always, I don't want to sound like I'm being deceitful with my clients, but I always do have a contingency that I don't share with them that's just for the things that I know are going to come up but are have not yet been disclosed.
Yep.
It's all going, every single item on my budget is available to anyone at any time in the process, like from the client side, from the vendor side. Also, when I'm with a client long term and we are moving from one location to another or one facility to another, I share the previous year's menus and budget so they
Mhm.
can see exactly how we spent the money. I'm very upfront and very collaborative in this process. And
Yep.
I think that's another big tip for you to share with people that are going to get value from this, I hope, is that it is about a partnership. It is about if you are running into a challenge with your budget, ask the facility, your partner, what can they do to help bring costs more in line.
Yeah.
There are some suggestions. We have started seeing that we've started not serving decaf
Hmm.
in the mornings. We have looked to do them in the afternoons if we do it at all. People want the caffeine in the morning, but some people are sensitive after about lunchtime. Do you need decaf at lunch if you're having to pay for the coffee? So decaf has been a big question. I will tell you, I've removed it from several of my programs. I haven't had a single complaint.
Yep.
The other thing is that from my side, when I was on the vendor side, when I worked in the convention centers, I might have a plethora of products. My chef may have gotten a really good deal on something. Something is, we had to purchase it for something and their numbers changed, or we had to buy a minimum amount. And I would do receptions for people. It's chef's choice, but I could get the budget in line for them just by saying, you let me pick what's the most cost effective for us to do for you or what requires the least amount of production and labor that I will have to expend, and I can get creative with you. So I hope that that's a hint that everyone can take or a
Yeah.
tip is if you are running into an issue, partner with your catering manager representative and ask them for assistance because they can be the best possible resource for you.
And I'll extend that partnership with your key stakeholders, right?
Yes,
Do you
absolutely.
do you need this menu verbatim for this selection, or is there flexibility within what is served? And then take that insight or your
Yeah.
facilities partners to say, here is the feedback. What can we do to work within this, right?
Right. As I mentioned before, you and I both do a lot of events in Las Vegas. It's a little bit different there. Their requirements, can be a bit more strict than other facilities, but at the same time, they're very good partners and they do things in such volume that they get great pricing. I will say, and I don't think it's a secret, that most of the large resort hotels in Vegas don't actually box their own lunches.
Right.
So we've looked at deconstructed box lunches, but there's a balance. Now they have to make all the sandwiches.
Yep.
So you look at what the opportunities are there. But you're absolutely right. Can we, a catering menu for the most part that a caterer or food service provider puts out, publishes, is going to be the best pricing you're going to get for the most part because they have costed it out. They know exactly what needs to happen. They have it down to the micro amount of an ounce. This is how much labor it costs us. This is how much and production costs. This is the food cost, all of those elements. But not to say that, at certain times of the year, if you want certain types of fruit, it might be more expensive. They may have priced it to be more expensive.
Yep.
But with your stakeholder, it's important to understand what they want to do. many of the high tech firms, standard multi-day conferences that we're doing, they want to continue to show improvement, something exciting, something different. So you need to understand, what does that mean for them? You need to partner with them and understand, is it maybe one lunch that we could do something at, or a special break, instead of trying to recreate the wheel for every menu. And I find that a lot of times that if you can just use the breakfasts as is, you can always add breakfast sandwiches to a continental breakfast, or you could do
Mhm.
some special station. But if what they want is to see something fun at a reception or a break or something different at lunch.
Perfect segue into packaged bar versus consumption bar. And the nuance that you can gain, especially if your attendee count is higher, that can be managed holistically to the budget that we've been talking about by way
Mhm.
of a consumption bar versus a package bar. Is there ever a time where there is a place for a package bar?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I do it for events that I know that they are heavy drinkers. Typically, at some places, you're required, if you go to a special event location, a nightclub, a lounge, a facility, they may only offer package bars instead of a consumption bar. At that point, you don't fight it. You look at the levels. Do you really need to have ultra premium? Because if it's a salesperson's conference, they tend to be very heavy drinkers. Not all, but tend to be. Why you don't necessarily need to give them the most expensive option. You don't need the ultra premium deluxe bar.
Mhm.
So you look at that. I also look at times. I'm very much an advocate of closing a bar before the event ends, in part to get people to leave, but also because I want to make sure that they're not walking out with beverages, and
Mhm.
that we are mindful of the liability of overindulgence.
Yep.
I look at, a 3 hour reception. Can we do the bars for 2.5 hours? But yes, I would also say there's a good time to do it when you do have a budget that's tight, because there won't be any surprises,
Sure.
right? Your
Yep.
surprises may still come in consumption on soft drinks and maybe how much you go through in coffee and tea and decaf. But if you need to stick very tightly, a package bar can be very good because you know what your costs are.
Yep.
I mean,
So the
I like a consumption bar
the
because this
consumption
also
and where I want
is
to direct our conversation is a little bit into, it's very popular right now to have your welcome reception on your expo floor to make
Mhm.
sure that you're getting all of the right people to your sponsors, and you're
It's
highlighting all of this humongous
exactly.
spend that you've put together in these booths and the showcase that you're isolating of your product, whatever have you. So the welcome reception at your day one kickoff, we would make the recommendation to do that based on a consumption bar, because why?
Absolutely. Because, well, for a number of reasons. First, it's travel of the attendees. A lot of times it's really before the welcome reception on many multi-day conferences is before your opening general session. So it's the night before. It's a way to get everyone to come in, be ready to go the next day. But there are still a lot of people who will travel after their workday or may not arrive until after the reception. You don't know how many people are going to be on the show floor. It's also tends to be the duration of the event. What we do see is we may recommend beer and wine only and not mixed drinks, because you want things to move at a quick pace so that they are moving around the show floor, and interacting with sponsors and exhibitors. But a lot of it has to do with the unknown of, you really don't know how many people are going to show up. If the welcome reception is at the end of the first full day, you're going to have a higher attendance. But still, it's in the evening. And again, people are in this I'm almost on vacation mentality. They're going to go out. They understand that it's a reception, it's not a dinner, and they're going to go out to eat. So they
Mhm.
don't tend to stay there that long. So why buy a package? You want the consumption. I still estimate high. Industry standards for a bar are that you estimate 2.5 drinks for the first hour, 2 drinks for the second hour, a drink for the third hour, and a half a drink going into hour 4 and hour 5, which, if you're at hour 4 or 5, you need to have a serious conversation with your stakeholders about the agenda, because that's too long for everyone. So I estimate high, and I always estimate on the most expensive option. If it's a mixed drink, a cocktail, or if it's the wine, I will do the 2.5 drinks of the wine or the cocktail for the first, I work backwards in that way. Again, this is also one of my areas where I'm holding back some money from the client for the
Yep.
things that I know will absolutely come up.
So
but
in that
100% contingency line.
scenario, like we are almost expecting some cost savings to come back from that reception so
Yes.
that we, instead of building a quote unquote contingency budget line that is visible of money held aside, this is a way to buffer our numbers a bit so that we
Yes.
are managing to the budget holistically while producing the event, right?
And I do both. I do this
Yep.
as a buffer and I still show a contingency line.
Yep. So there is a piece of that puzzle that I don't think enough people do, and that
Okay.
is the on site reconciliation piece of the banquet checks.
Okay.
So come to find, as we've been exploring meeting planning standards, that not many people ask for banquet checks to reconcile the next day. They wait for the program to conclude and they get their final bill, and it's like Pandora's box, like what ended up happening, right? So how is this approach of reconciling in real time advantageous to managing to a budget?
Well, first of all, I'm surprised to hear you say that you're hearing this from other planners. And why I'm surprised is, again, I can wear both hats. I know what it's like to be the provider. And so I offer this every day. It's an expectation and a standard on the provider side. So shame on the providers if they're not saying, we're going to give you your banquet checks the next day.
Mm-hmm.
Where it always becomes a little tricky is depending on who from the caterer puts in the actuals is when you get your banquet checks. Sometimes it's accounting at different department, at different companies. So they're only there Monday through Friday.
Yep.
Sometimes it's people from the banquet staff and they're entering it in on the evening and you can get it the next morning. Most of the time, the amounts or the actuals are being entered and the final numbers are being entered for each banquet check because they have to reconcile it on their end. Each one of that is being done the morning following, but it could be if you have an event on a Friday, they don't do anything until Monday morning.
Mm-hmm.
With that being said, you absolutely should be asking for this because you don't want any surprises. And for me, a lot of my budgets with these multi-day conferences are built on getting a discount or a rebate should they have certain levels of food and beverage spend achieved. So I have $1 million budget. If I spend $1 million, I get 5% back at the end of the program. Well, that can add up.
Yep.
But if I spend 1.2, I not only get my 5% on the original, but I get 10% on the $200,000 difference.
Mm-hmm.
And I need to know about that. That rebate can go help your stakeholder make decisions in other areas. I do not include the rebate on any of my budgets. I may show them what I expect the amount to be, but it is never factored into what my budget amount is. Usually it is almost like the client doing the same thing that we're doing with contingencies.
Yep.
This covers, we needed to add some more graphics on site. We needed to add some more temporary staff. We had a problem that needs to be solved, and it's by putting more people or more materials towards it. It's their contingency a lot of times. But also, what's important is if you're going to come in under budget. And if you don't achieve a food and beverage minimum, this is in many ways more important. If you're not going to achieve your minimum, you have to pay outright cash to
Yep.
make up the difference. And that's horrible. Why wouldn't you want to order more wine or a nicer wine or a champagne toast to thank everyone or a special staff breakfast to thank all the people who've worked 18 hours a day for 10 days? Why would you not want to do something for them versus just give a company outright cash?
Yep.
So if you're not keeping track of it as you're going along, you won't know. I can give you an example that you and I both experienced at a Vegas facility post-COVID. Attendance hadn't come back. You know, they had negotiated their contracts 4 or 5 years before COVID hit.
Mm-hmm.
We were still able to go through with the event, but there was definitely a decrease in attendance. People were still nervous about traveling. We ended up $60,000 under budget. I don't want to hand this resort $60,000. So the chef, as a partner, because we very much partnered with the resort and the food and beverage team, The chef said, I have done something for someone else that I can offer to you. And they ended up doing a donation in the form of food and beverage to homeless facilities.
Yeah.
And we spent the money. The organization got credit for a very nice donation to the food bank. Um, and we didn't have to just hand them cash.
Yeah.
We may not
And
have consumed the money, but we can also, there are ways to spend money if you are below. You can add bottled water. It may not be environmentally or sustainably the best option, but people love to get bottled water to take it with them to go to
well,
the
now it
airport as
comes
their
in aluminum bottles and boxes.
Sure.
So
But
depending
you
on the
can send
facility
them,
that you're at.
yeah. But you can put out the packaged items that you didn't give them during the time. You can hand out, I'm sorry, if nothing else, people are a hero if they bring candy or chips
Yep.
or something like that home to their loved ones. So it's in very it's critical to have a daily reconciliation. Now, I will warn you, if you're not doing this already, a lot of times it happens later in the day when you're
Sure.
tired. By the time you get the banquet checks, it could be mid to late afternoon, but you want to enter them. And I'm very fortunate to have people who work with me who help keep me on track with this. But you want to enter them so that you should have a idea of what you're spending, what you project to spend each day and what you actually spent each day, and monitor the delta, positive or negative.
Yep. And where do you identify that threshold of, and in some of these larger programs, that can be a full-time, 5 day role on site specifically, right? So at what threshold do you think it's good to consider someone on your support team to pull aside to have you help prioritize that in real time reconciliation? Is it 1,500 person attendee count or
No, I don't know that it's necessarily a attendee count as it is. You have to look at the overall services,
sure?
because I'm fortunate that most of the people that I have worked with, both that work with me on my team for food and beverage, or I have worked to support others, most of our events for food and beverage elements are done by mid-afternoon. You may have a staff or crew dinner one night, you may have a reception, but you don't necessarily need your whole team doing that. So if you can, we try to ask most facilities to have the info to us by 1 or 2 so that we actually get it by 3. And then usually after your mid-afternoon break, there's a period of time. However, when you get to a certain number of services, banquet event orders,
Mhm.
there is one conference that we've both worked on that has almost 1,200 banquet event orders. That each one of those has to be processed. That requires a full-time person to
Yep.
just process, to handle the administrative elements of it. But it's not about the number of people who attend it, it's the number of services. So I would say when you're starting to get up to a couple of hundred, you may want to look at whether it's full-time or part-time, where you bring someone in either early, there's a lot of early services. Everyone gets started. You want to get the day off right. But maybe there's someone who comes in a little bit later that's doing admin and can help cover the evening event. So I
Yep.
think it's knowing your comfort level. I've been spoiled. I get a lot of help from people who work with me. Um, but it does take some time, and it is, you're tired. So having somebody who can dedicate and focus on that might be of importance to you, depending on what else. You also have to balance that not only with after mid-afternoon break and evening receptions or dinners, but a lot of times there's a wrap-up meeting each day in the
Yep.
afternoon for everyone to talk about what went well for the day, but more importantly, what do we need to fix for the next day? So you have to consider all of this. And if you can, again, partner with the team and see who has the strongest points in this, or maybe you have an office admin who you can ask to do this. I think it's just looking and knowing the size of the program and how many orders you're actually working with.
Yep. Uh, really great insights across the board. I think we've touched on so many tangible takeaways of what people can apply to their program planning for this year and beyond. What are the things to kind of wrap us up here that you feel like are impacting budget expectations going into the 2025 year?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. Number one, I think that a lot of companies, Silicon Valley firms, have been waiting to put some plans into place to see the results of our recent presidential election.
Sure.
With that being said, I think you may see now that the decision has been finalized, I think that you will see some people who want to have heartier budgets
Hmm.
because I think people are going to be a bit more willing to travel and spend. I think there's concerns by part of the population, but I don't see that that's as much of a concern for corporate business as it would be maybe for association or social or nonprofit.
Yep. Statistically speaking, like any election year, there is generally some budget reservations. And then,
Yes,
whatever the outcome of the election, the year after or once the decision has been solidified, the weddings book,
they
conference
do.
budget gets solidified, things like that.
I do, but I think that things may be a bit, um, however you feel politically, I think that we will have some stronger budgets. I think
Hmm.
people will be more in a position with their companies to travel. I think that there will be some economic upturn. I don't know necessarily that's going to factor into all elements, but I think the meetings and events industries will actually see a bit of an upturn for a while. It
Got it.
may level out in time, but I think we're getting closer to pre-COVID levels. I think we'll see that stronger in 2025.
Yep.
I do think that there is what I think that people will be more willing to come and spend, but I think that you're going to see much higher prices. Already there's a sense of inflation every year with food and beverage. Um, and I think that's going to, I think budgets are going to be impacted because things are going to cost even more. I think you're going to see, you will be held to certain budgets for the first couple of months, but I think that companies will quietly put out new menus, catering menus, probably for March or April. And I would also expect a mid-year budget. So I expect that costs will increase. I think budgets may increase some. I think people have been holding on, making decisions, but I think your costs are going to increase more so than your budget. So you're
Sure.
going to have to partner and look at what's really important. We've both been asked, with some budgets that had to be brought back in line, where could we cut? Do you cut a morning break or an afternoon break? Can we pull back on how many selections? Do we need a hot breakfast or a hot lunch? What are the options here? Some companies, some high tech companies already know they like, there's one company, they do not provide hot lunches. It's a
Hmm.
box lunch.
Hmm.
Okay. But that, we look at it as okay, it's understood that a lot of people don't want to necessarily do breakfast. People are still looking for coffee when they get to the first meeting of the day, whether it's the general session or into breakouts or whatever meetings. Um, do you need to do a mid-morning break? You have to look at the timing. Is there enough time to warrant a break between an opening general session or a general session and lunch?
Sure.
Sometimes maybe that's where you eliminate, but people are going to lag in the afternoon, so you need to provide them something sweet or salty. I think prices are going to be a somewhat of a sticker shock. I think we're going to see increases. There's a clause in most catering contracts that you are subject to prices, or the facility reserves the right to change prices up to 90 days in advance. Sometimes it's even 30 days in advance. I think just be aware of that and be very, um, uh, again, staying in communication and understanding what the implications are. I definitely see some price increases.
Yep. Really great insights. And just to do a bit of shameless plugging, I think that the tool that you are using, whether it be your spreadsheet or the platform that you are using, allows you to remain nimble. And the less button clicks that you have to do to right size your budget or roll up a scenario is really coming down to the amount of bandwidth that you have available to execute and pre plan this program. So, anywhere that as a planner a food and beverage planner, you can build in the efficiencies to your process.
Mhm.
It is going to be an ask and an assumption going into next year, as it was this year, of how are
Running,
these decisions
yes.
impacting our budget?
And running budget scenarios, absolutely. I'm starting to use Folio. I've been a Excel person for a long time and then transferred to Google Sheets. But something I like to do is I do my guarantees on a separate sheet and it's all formula driven. And I have to learn how to do that in Folio properly. But I can go in and at a click or 3 clicks or whatever, say if we change our guarantee, for me, everything is a percentage. I only guarantee 100% for any meal function or any break if it's a plated event, if they're
Sure.
sitting down and being served a meal. And even then I might not do 100% because if there's other people going around or things like that. But for the most part, I start out at percentages. So I keep the same percentages. They are ones that have worked for me from when I executed to now when I'm planning. I've used the same general percentages. So when someone says, hey, our numbers are coming in a bit lower, what does this look like? Or they're coming in higher. What are the scenarios and what is this going to do? And where do we have to look to make changes? So using those tools that are available to you is of critical importance. But yes, I like to have everything tied so where I can make changes to just a few places and get the updates.
Yep.
And so
Yep.
that's what I look to do. May take a little more time to build at the beginning, but in the end, it's going to save you as you get closer to crunch time when you need to give guarantees, when you need to track where your numbers are.
Yeah. And that percentage conversations is enough to fill an entirely new
Yes,
hour. So I'm
absolutely.
excited to hopefully come back to that conversation and have that with you. I really appreciate all of your insights that you shared today and appreciate you as a partner as well. So thank you so much for sitting down and having this conversation with me.
Thank you. I'm delighted to do so and happy to do so in the future. Thank
Awesome.
you.